Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Complete with Purdeep. My name is Purdeep Sangha, and I'm known as the strategist for businessmen. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of our show today. We go live every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you for joining us here again. So today's episode is going to be jam-packed. We got a ton of value to share with you, and I'm super excited to have our guest on, and we're going to bring him on in a few minutes here. But the topic of today's conversation is going to be, it's not going to be super lighthearted, although we will probably have those chances to talk about that a little bit. It's a very serious topic. It's a very much, you can say, needed topic in today's age, because it's a conversation that's been going on for centuries, actually, when we take a look at it. But why is this topic important? It's important because this show is all about men, right? The real lives of men, the lives that we live, all the good stuff, but also the challenges that we face today. And the gentleman that's going to be coming on as our guest today is going to talk about the challenges of certain men in today's society. And I can talk about that personally myself, because one of the topics that we're going to discuss is racism, and how racism impacts society and how it can actually damage society for everybody that lives within the community. My parents immigrated here from India, and they moved to a small town in Canada, and it was a love-hate relationship with the community. There were people within the community that openly accepted them and made them feel like they belonged, and then there were people in the community that made them feel like they didn't belong, that they should go back to their country. And growing up, I could say that every day, there wasn't one day up until probably about my university years that I didn't face some kind of racism, someone calling me the term Paki, or go back to your country, or Hindu, or whatever that was. But I can say that that made me stronger. But here in Canada, when it comes to racism, I could say it's not as bad as it is in the US, because we aren't necessarily afraid for our lives, right? Someone can call us a name, someone could even throw a punch at us, which has happened many times to me, but I'm not necessarily fearful of my life. And I think I feel for those individuals who are fearful of their lives just based on their color or their ethnic background or the language that we speak. So it's a very important conversation. And I don't think we've talked about it enough. I think it's come up a lot over the last couple of years, especially because we're seeing the topic talked about more, but we're also seeing the other side where there's more open racism. And I think I'm actually open to that, because I'd like to have conversations with individuals who have those types of beliefs, rather than it being closet racism, because I think closet racism is a lot more dangerous. I think we need to have open conversations, because then at least we're having a dialogue. We're actually talking about what the challenges are. And that's important. But before we get into this even more, I want to lighten it up. Elio, are you there, my friend?
Oh yeah, I am here as
What?
every day.
There's our backstage guy right there. He's the producer of this show. You know what? Why don't we just share that? Why don't you play some piano for us, man? Get us going on the right vibe.
Oh yeah, here we go. I hope you like it. In case you need this melody today. I hope you like it, man.
Yeah, I think we need that melody today, man. I'm always amazed by your talent and people. I've always been envious of the piano for some reason. There's something about that instrument that just melts my heart. I wish I could play as good as you.
Thank you. I just think music heals. It heals the soul. So, I wanted to just share that melody for whoever was, going through a tough time that day. I was like, hey, here it is for you. That's my gift for you today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Elio. So with that, we have an interesting guest, but before we bring him on, if you haven't gotten your copy of The Complete Man, please do. You can go to completemanaudio.com and use the promo code Victory75 to get 75% off. So go to completemanaudio.com and use the promo code Victory75. I've gotten a ton of feedback from not only men who are reading the book, but also women. And interesting enough, a lot of the women have said they wish they would have read the book years ago. And getting into this conversation, there's two reasons why, is because it would have helped them in their relationship with their man. And it would have helped them raise their sons and daughters a little bit better as well. So I want to thank you for reading the book. I really appreciate your support. So thank you again. So when it comes to music, when it comes to books, we have Dr. Colbert here, who is the author of Murder in the Second Degree, I Can't Breathe. He's also very interesting. He's in the space, or has done academic studies in sacred music, which I got to pick his brain about because that is phenomenal. So Dr. Colbert, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much. And Elio, I enjoyed that. And you forgot that I'm also a classical and jazz pianist. So maybe one of these days I can share.
Yeah, please do. I wish I would have known. I would have told you to be close to your piano, because I think it's phenomenal. I think, like Elio said, music does heal the soul. And who better to know that than you, Dr. Colbert? So can you give a little bit of background of yourself? Like, you're a doctor in sacred music. How did that happen? What led you down that path?
Well, it started in high school. Here at Gainesville High School, I had a phenomenal music teacher, Lynn Sandifer, and she just pushed me into music, which I was already interested in. So when I went to college at St. Augustine's University, I naturally majored in music and loved it. I was actually going to do pre-med. And I was becoming a little schizophrenic with all of the courses, quantitative and qualitative analysis. So I said, no, this is not for me. So let me go with something I know. And
that sounds familiar, because I did the same thing, pre-med, and then went into business for that very reason. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, I went on a music and tennis scholarship. Halfway through, I decided to go pro and lost my tennis scholarship, but that was fine because I was still making some money. Graduated, and several years later, since I was already in ministry, I decided to enter into seminary at Candler at Emory University. From there was another program across town at the Interdenominational Theological Center with the Dr. Melva Costin. Everyone wanted to work with her because she was the person in sacred music to work with. So I had Melva Costin on one end, Don Saliers, who was at Emory, on the other end. So in my last year of Candler, I entered ITC and did a full program, a full credit hour at both institutions at the same time. It almost killed me. Managed to do a 4.0 at both of them. I'm listed in volumes 18 and 19 in the National Dean's List. I will never do that again. And sacred music, because I'm in the church, because I was pastoring, I've always done music, and it made sense to me to focus on sacred music. So I did that. I never regretted it. However, I did have a bit of a difficulty with my conference, since I was United Methodist, and they wanted to know, okay, when are you coming back to Florida? I said, well, I have graduated from Candler, but I'm now doing a sacred music degree. So I said, well, why sacred music? I said, well, it's indicative and inherent that I do it because God has duly gifted me in music and in ministry. So they wanted me to choose either do diaconal or pulpit ministry, but I could not do both. And I said, well, that doesn't work for me because I've always done both. And I don't want to be compartmentalized. So we kind of fell out, went the separate ways. But I'm still preaching. And then all of my writing has been in the sacred music area. As a matter of fact, I have another book coming out in 2 months called Reasons Why We Sing, an in-depth look at music ministry and its psychological as well as theological applications.
So can I ask you then, because I grew up, our religious faith is Sikhism, and and we have what they call kirtan, or in the English pronunciation, kirtan, which is their version of, you could say, sacred music. And I remember going to the temple we would go every Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday, for the most part, for prayer. And when they did that, there was something very calming about the music. There is something very obviously spiritual. You could tell just watching the people around, like everybody would go into a certain state of peace, of content. And so can you maybe, just for my ignorance, because I had no clue that there was you can say, specialty in sacred music. What do you see as the difference between sacred music and just regular music, if there is a difference?
Well, there is a distinct difference. Regular music, you've got all of the isms of the world coming in to influence how you think, how you feel. You can listen to certain types of music and be brought into that space. My first book I wrote was on hip hop, holy or unholy hip hop, a critical look at the effects of hip hop music in the church. And if you're pouring that into your mind early in the morning or throughout the day, you begin to think like what you're hearing. However, the sacred music, as Elio says, brings peace. It's a calming effect, and it causes you, by way of the lyrics, to be able to hear from God. Now, in your religion, there is a deity. When you go into the temple to listen to that music that connects to that deity, then it's a calming effect so that you can better hear whatever is speaking to you, to your mind, to your heart, and to your soul. So that becomes a sacredness that you connect to, that forms your thinking, forms your worldview, if you will.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And my mom, who lives on the other side of the country, came to visit us for 6 weeks during the winter. And she is very religious, and she brought along with her religious radio that she basically, it's got the Wi-Fi, it's got everything all pre-programmed. And I remembered listening to this as a child, and just what the memories that it brought back and the peace and content it brought into our household. She would just play it in the background in the morning, where my wife is also of Indian descent. But not really religious. She went and actually bought one of those radios when my wife left, or when my mom left, because she wanted to continue that piece. And our kids, I was surprised in terms of how fast they picked up on it, how fast they picked up on the prayer as well. So I think it's very important for a family, from my personal perspective, to practice that, to have that in the household, because I think it just brings a level of peace and unity that is much needed right now. So let's dive right into your book here, because I think this is an important topic. Murder in the Second Degree, I Can't Breathe. Can you talk about that? What led you to write that book? And what is the book about?
Well, Murder in the Second Degree, I Can't Breathe, The Road to Reform. We all remember the horrific pictures back in the last of May with George Floyd. Well, millions of people were watching that at the same time. I too was watching it. It came over my Facebook feed, and I said, what is going on? When is this man going to get off of his neck? And I literally sat there in tears, wondering when this was going to stop. Somebody please help him. So when it was all over, the next day, I was sitting back in my office, and and I was listening to music, and the Spirit of God says, "Write." I said, "Write what?" Said, "Write about what you just witnessed." So I began to write. Did not know where I was going, but I've written other things before. So I said, well, let me try to put this in some type of framework. And I started to write. I literally wrote day and night. I finished this book in just under 2 months, about 7 weeks. And it was 437 pages. I could have gone more, but I said, I've got to end this somewhere. Um, Information kept coming in. News reports kept coming in of Black and brown Americans that have been killed by the hands of rogue police officers using such things as qualified immunity to justify what they have done to us. We, as minorities, and that includes you, continue to suffer through insensitivity to varied cultures. And it's because of the fact that you don't understand a culture at its root, at its genesis, that your insensitivity continues to thrive. Your hatred continues to thrive because they are not like you. Most times, anything or anyone that is not like you, then you take offense, you feel threatened, especially with the shift in this country where European Americans are quickly becoming the minority now. And Hispanics and African Americans are moving up into the majority. So when you get to a point that you feel that you are being systematically replaced, then that causes a problem. It causes a big problem. And then you do everything that you can to make sure that you are one of the ones who tries to eliminate that problem or slow that problem down on any platform that you possibly can.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's all driven by fear. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to say ignorance, but I want to say lack of understanding, because I think
Right.
that's essentially what it is. And I just want to point out one thing here. When it comes to, if we talk about the world of neuroscience or psychology, because I base a lot of our stuff on science, we as individuals have to understand that it's a natural part of us to, when we see someone that's not of the same color or not of the same group, to have a stereotype. It's naturally built into us, but we have to be cognizant and aware and override that with our conscious thinking to say, we are of the same people, we're of the same race, we are of the same kind, we have the same blood. And so when people say that, I think what ends up happening is people are feeding on that natural tendency of our brain to have that stereotype. And unfortunately, until people are educated about that, we're going to continue to have this. So here's my perspective, Dr. Colbert, is that, I faced a lot of racism, but I've never been fearful of my life. Yes, I was fearful of getting beat up, and I got beat up a number of times. But being fearful of your life is a completely different ballgame. And I've never felt that. And so I think this is a worthy conversation. But I've always had open conversations with people that have faced me or confronted me with racism, because I think I've looked upon it as an opportunity to educate, but also understand as well, because I feel sorry for these individuals that are feeling that way. And that's just my personal perspective, because there must be some kind of hate or anger inside of them that they are portraying. When it comes to your book, can you talk about what you share in the book specifically when it comes to George Floyd, and whether it's the stuff that led up to it or the aftermath? What will a reader get from reading your book?
Well, to piggyback off of what you just said, and being fearful, I think it starts with classical conditioning. We are classically conditioned by our families, how we grow up. Howard Thurman said that we are the sum total of our surroundings. So everything that informs our environment is what programs us for the hatred, to programs us to dislike someone who is not like you, who doesn't look like you, walk like you, talk like you. And when we talk about coming together in this country, well, we can never truly come together until we address the root problem of where this racism is coming from. And you mentioned earlier, closet racism. There's a whole lot of that going on.
Mm-hmm.
But coming into what happened with George Floyd, I think that it was a symptom of what had been festering, not just in that community, but all over this country for over 400 years. And we have seen beatings, we have seen hangings taking place. There was one killing that happened about a week before Floyd. The name escapes me at the moment. But if that had been given proper attention, that would have been the one to talk about rather than George Floyd. But then when you got a police department, justice department that has been operating in a certain way for years and years and years, and then repeated killings all of the time, it takes only one catalyst, as they say, the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, this was that straw. It was just a little too much weight for the community to bear. And when this happened, then all hell breaks loose. We saw rage happening because most likely the people who protested had been affected in some adverse way by their family members being killed, by being stopped for no reason at all, tail light out, driving too slow. Sometimes I got stopped one time for driving too slow, coming through a little town here called Waldo. And when they pulled me over, they said, well, sir, where are you going? I said, well, I'm trying to get back home. Say, well, you know that you're driving through here too slowly. I said, well, sir, the speed limit said 40 miles an hour. Yes, I was driving 30 miles an hour because just around the corner was a Shell station so I could get some coffee. So I was not trying to veer off the road. I was just trying to get to somewhere where I could get some coffee. They took me out of the car, patted me down. Sir, can we search your car? I said, no, you do not have permission to search my car. I was just coming from church. I was dressed, and that did not matter. So they finally let me go. And then I went around the corner and got my coffee. I was still shaken. But these types of things happen for no reason. They do it because they know that they can. They know that they can get away with it. And it's a license to kill minorities. Now, anyone will tell you who knows me. Royal is not prejudice, not at all. But Royal is against injustice of any kind, in any form. And when it affects me, when it affects people I know, when it affects adverse communities that I know about, then something rises up and someone has to speak about it profoundly.
Yeah, thank you again. I think you're absolutely right, because we're going to get onto a topic here very soon when it comes to police and this concept of defund police, because I think that needs to be talked about and aired as well, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions there. But what you talked about is absolutely correct. I'm going to share my personal experiences. Again, from a religious background, our faith, Sikhism, was born out of injustice. It was born as a group of warriors standing up where throughout India at that time, people were being forced to convert into a specific religion. And Sikhism, the Sikhs at that time, stood up and said, no, every person has the right to believe in what they want to believe. And we will stand for that. We will stand for this injustice. And that's where they came up with the turbans, the long beards. You'll see Sikhs actually have a sword as well. They'll carry a sword with them because they are warriors for injustice. They're there to stand for those who don't have the ability to stand up for themselves. So I very much understand what you are talking about. And that is still, that challenge is still happening in India hundreds of years later, where they're being persecuted for that very reason, because they are standing up and they won't assimilate, for example, and they won't go away either because they believe in justice. So I think it's something, it's from, my grandfather taught me this, and he was a very religious man. He was also a very spiritual man. He was also in the military in India for 3+ decades. And he taught me, as a man, I remember as a young kid, this is the one thing that stands out the most. He said, people can take away your home. People can take away your education certifications. They can take your family members from you, because he saw it. And he said they could take the shirt off your back, but the one thing they can't take away from you are your values and your principles. And for that, you have to have solid values and principles as a man. That's what makes a man. And that stood with me for years. And I still, to this day, and that's what I teach the men that I work with, is we have to have strong principles. And that means having these tough conversations and standing up for what is right, not necessarily what is popular. And let's get into this topic of defunding police, because I think what has happened, from my perspective, is that people have used this as a way to fight the movement for justice. Because I don't think anybody is talking about defunding the police. We need to have police because police, they're there to keep everybody safe. What I think people are asking for is hold people accountable, the people within the departments at all levels, accountable for not living up to their training, or just going outside of their training and hurting people. That's ultimately what people are asking for. So do you see this? Do you hear a lot about this defund? Because I hear it quite a bit, and I'm just like, where is this coming from?
I do hear quite a bit. And my perspective is that I don't think that you want to take all of the funding away from the police department. But what you do want to do is to redirect the funding to social programs, to where, take for example, if you've got a call to where there's a person who has a mental issue. Now, the police department may not know that that person has a mental impediment, but the community knows. So therefore, you don't want to send in guns blazing, but you want to send in someone with that officer that has some social or mental health training, so that they can help de-escalate the situation that's going on. The police don't have the skills to de-escalate a situation where there's a person with mental issues going on. So therefore, if the police don't know the history of this person, and there's no way that they could know unless the officers are product of that community. And that's one of the things that I advocate for in the book. Many times, if you hire officers from a particular community or locale that people already know, they are stationed in that community, they patrol that community, then people are more likely to gravitate towards him to tell them what's going on. Paul down the street, we know that he has issues. He's had them for years. He may walk out of the house with just a diaper on sometimes, but that's because of what's been going on. So now you don't want to take him, sling him down on the ground, push his head down into the sand to where he can't breathe, but rather you want to be sensitive to what's going on and make sure that this person comes out of this particular experience alive and well. Many times they don't come out alive and well. They come out dead and on a slab.
So, Dr. Colbert, then, what are you seeing as an aftermath then of George Floyd and the protests? Because here's the other side too. There were some violent protests, and I understand why people were angry, but there was also some violence, unnecessary violence. What's your take in terms of the aftermath of what happened and where we are today? Are we still having those communications? Are we still talking about this? Are we working through? Is it the system, whether it's the police system or any system? Is this still a conversation that is effectively being had?
This is a conversation that is still being had because it has to be had. The aftermath is that, granted, there were a lot of infiltrators. Now, there are many times when there is no, strife going on, but there are persons within a particular community who wants to instigate that strife. So therefore, they wait until something major happens and they join in with the peaceful protesters to then begin looting and doing everything else. Now, this focuses the attention not on the ones who are doing it, but on the whole group. You don't focus on a single person. You see the whole group as being responsible. It was proven that there were people who weren't a part of certain groups who would come in, throw rocks, break windows, and then they ignited or started the fire that got other people hurt. So then this conversation is still going on because people are still being blamed that don't look like the majority at this time for what is going on. So I believe Trump said something about Antifa. No, it was not them. You try to blame everybody else for your own frailties and your own failures. Let's call it for what it is. It's many different types of racism, systemic racism, economic racism, closeted racism, as you say. All of these things are playing a role, and they have been festered. They have been put in place for years. It sometimes takes just a spark to ignite or set into motion these things that have already been planned for a long time out. And once they are in motion, then it becomes very difficult to stop them. We have issues with housing. People would redline, redraw districts to where it favors them politically and economically, thus phasing out people who really need it because they want to make money from the economic restructuring of a particular district. This is still happening. And unless the people in the community, unless we get representatives who can speak to our cause, not talk about what they really want, but speak to the cause of the people, then we're still going to be doing this. Dr. Barber talks about the Poor People's Movement, a powerful movement that started back with Dr. King. This is still going on because the conversations still need to be had. There are still people suffering from economic devastation. There are still people suffering in our community who don't have a voice. And many times those who are in power silence the voice because they don't want to hear the truth about what's really going on.
Yeah, again, and it's just a very good point there. So I'm going to talk about the economics of that because I think people overlook that because we take a look at living wage. And that's one of the big hot topics in the US right now is the living wage. And I just spoke to a friend yesterday who has a business, a successful business, and he's expanded into the US. And here's what he said. He said in Pennsylvania, he said in some parts, the minimum wage he was saying was at $7 and something cents. And that's what they're paying. That's what his competition is paying. And he came in there and he said, there's no way I could pay someone that much. That's not even, they're not able to survive off that. Like, how is that working? So he said he made the choice as a conscious leader to pay $19 because,
wow.
yeah. And he said, I could make more money by paying a lot less, obviously. But he said I couldn't be able to, that wouldn't live up to his conscience. He wouldn't be able to go to sleep at night properly. Like, these are things that we need to take in count when we make these decisions as leaders. That's important. And from a business perspective, let's take a look at this. I'm so flabbergasted by how business people don't understand this. When you have a stronger and healthier community, depending on the industry though, because if you have a weaker community, some industries actually thrive in the weaker community. And so I think we need to understand where that trail of money goes. But when you generally have a stronger community, which means people are actually able to afford things, afford healthcare, able to put food in their kids' mouths, are less stressed. People are more productive. When you have a more productive community, you have higher economics. People are able to buy more. And this is a cyclical effect. When you have stronger communities, you have a stronger country. And if you have a stronger country, you're going to have greater GDP. You're going to have stronger businesses, more innovation. You're going to grow and you're going to become an economic powerhouse. And I think that's where things are being overlooked, is by taking care of people that are less fortunate, that just don't have the means or the education. You're actually doing yourself a service from an economic standpoint, because it eventually pays back. I think there's a misconception and a misunderstanding, and this has been shown by work. I forgot the name, 2 Nobel Prize winners that did work in India that talked about this, because there's an assumption that people of lower class, for example, or less fortunate individuals don't want to work, that they're just lazy, that they want to collect welfare. That is completely false. Yes, there are a group of people, individuals that are lazy, that don't want to work, that would rather collect a paycheck if the government pays them. But that's not everybody. And this has been shown that if you provide the incentive, if you give people the opportunity, the education to work and give them the employment, they will actually work, and they will work harder than you think they will. And so this is something, again, this is a very important conversation that I think is being had at certain levels in certain states, within certain districts, for example, but as an overall country. And I'm going to talk about this too, because I think in Canada, we talk about this a little bit more. I think we're a little bit more open to it. I wish my my counterparts in the US would have these conversations, and I know they're being had. I'm not going to say that this isn't a conversation that's happening. It is happening. I just wish it would happen at a grander scale. So I think exactly what you're talking about, this is happening. It's real, and we do need to talk about it. So what is your hope for this book in terms of people reading it? If you had a vision, what is your vision for people reading your book and going forward for the next few years?
Well, I think it offers many opportunities for conversation. It also offers a few solutions. At the beginning, I talk about the biblical call for justice, and then the ending chapter is the Christian response to racism. I think that this book will allow people to look at the country, but also look at themselves at the same time. We must realize that even though it's not called that, we in America have a caste system going on, just like in India. We don't see it as a caste system because it's not, we didn't grow up using that terminology. But when you look at it, that's exactly what it is. And when you begin to read and look at what's going on, the digital book is user-friendly because of the fact that there are hyperlinks to when I talk about certain stories. I include the video of the police stop and what happened during that time so that you can actually see. It's one thing to read, but when you inform that reading with seeing at the same time, you begin to take on a whole different perspective as to what your role is, what's happening in your own community, and how to solve it. So when you begin to read the book, my hope is that this will spawn various conversations. Now, granted, it's going to make a whole lot of people mad. That's fine. I want to make you mad. to the point that you want to do something about it, to the point that you want to change your thinking about it, to the point that you want to begin to see people differently who are both in and outside of your space. Many times you have lots of white people saying, "Oh, I'm not prejudiced. Some of my best friends are Black." Well, what are you saying? But would you think about marrying a person of a different race, or would that offend your family to the point that you would be disinherited or not talked to anymore? No, those are some of the real things that happen. You can say that, well, I talked to this person, but would you invite that person to dinner? I had years ago I think that we all remember the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Sidney Poitier. I had a real life Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I was dating this woman, and she was white. Wonderful relationship. We'd been together for a while, and her mother invited me to dinner. So I thought about that thing. I said, now, how is this going to really work? I said, okay, I'll go. Because I knew sooner or later I was going to have to meet the father. Came in, the mom greeted me at the door. Joanna greeted me at the door, and we came in, and then the father came in. And when he saw me, you could tell the rage that was in his eyes. He didn't show it physically, but he wouldn't even shake my hand. And I heard the term, "Oh, you're Black." Well, on the phone, when I talked to you, you sounded white. I said, well, as you can see, I can assure you, I'm very much African American. So those misconceptions of hearing a voice on the phone, I'm glad that my voice tends to be a bit raceless sometimes. And why is that? Because while coming up, a product of my mother, who was an English teacher, she corrected everything I said. She says, now you need to speak the King's English. Needless to say, I'm the only one of my siblings who talks like me, but that's fine, because I'd listened to what was going on. I'd listened to what was being taught to me. So back to classically conditioned. Had my parents not been educators, perhaps I would not have had that well-rounded perspective. Just as your grandfather told you things that stuck with you, that was a form of classical conditioning coming up out of the home. My great-grandfather said the same thing. He was a preacher, and he took me down one day. I was about 9 or 10, and he says, I want you to know something, and that is, you see white people, Black people in this community. I am well respected. I've never had a problem. But you need to know that everyone is the same. They're just of a different color. And you need to treat everyone with honor and respect. That has rested with me all of my life. And I try to teach other young people that as well. You can't go around degrading people. You can't go around degrading women, because when you do that, you degrade yourself. It makes you look like a hoodlum. It makes you look less than who you say you are. So if you are to live up to your own creed, live up to who you say that you are, who you say that you want to become, then you have to treat everyone, that white guy over there sitting across, you have got to treat him with respect. I don't care what he says, you follow that with a word of kindness. The Bible says that we are to take care of the widows and the orphans. When we take care of people, then the economic downturn that we are experiencing will be eradicated, because by taking care of, that means you pay people a living wage, that you have people on the job, treat them with respect, making your working conditions pleasing so that people want to come to work with you. When I heard your friend who's paying $19 now, well, maybe I need to go up to Pennsylvania to work with him. Because this stimulates an economy to the point that everybody and his mama and uncle wants to come and work for you and with you because they see what you're doing in the community. When you've got people who want to work with you, they do a better job because they feel as though you really appreciate what they're doing and that you find value in them as a person, value in them as a worker. So then they become at the forefront of who you say your company is. Say, oh, I work for them over there, and I take pride in what I'm doing. I remember the Honey Oats commercial. There was this African American woman on there that she was walking by, and people would say, oh, she smells like so and such. Great smell. I say, oh, that's just my Honey Oats. But she worked for a company that she loved, that placed value in her. So then when they place value in her, she in turn, it's a reciprocal effect. She then places value in them, wanting to do the very best job she can, always speaking kindly about the company, so that if she's talking kindly about it, this spawns other people to purchase. This spawns other people to come and want to work. Therefore, you're paying this wonderful wage. It then improves the status of the people in the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. That is great. That is awesome. Dr. Colbert, where can people go to get a copy of your book or contact you?
All right. Well, you can get it on Amazon, both the paperback and the digital version. And then there's a phone number that's coming up. Call me or text me at 352-453-7115, or email me, because I don't always look at my phone, at AmadeuSpublishing@gmail.com. It's AMADEUS publishing@gmail.com. And we'll send me the money. I will sign the book, because the great thing about getting it from me, you get a signed copy. You don't get a signed copy from Amazon.
Thank you so much. For those of you out there listening, for those of you out there listening and watching, please, if you're interested, get a copy of Dr. Colbert's book. Contact him if you'd like to have a conversation. He's a very enlightened gentleman. I thoroughly enjoyed, Dr. Colbert, having you here today. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for spreading the word and having intellectual, intelligent, and understanding conversations, because I think that's exactly what we need to have. So thank you. I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much.
What an amazing guest, Dr. Colbert, the author of Murder in the Second Degree. You know what? I'm definitely going to pick up the book and read it myself. I think it's important. Again, it's a topic that is sensitive. A lot of us don't want to talk about it. A lot of us talk about, well, we support it, but are we actively supporting this challenge that we're facing in society? And this isn't just whether it's Canada or the US. This is all across the world, right? This is the biggest challenge that we've had as mankind, is how to deal with our differences in a human way, bringing that humanity into how we live. So I just want to thank Dr. Colbert again for his wise wisdom. Having conversations is the most important thing that we can do as leaders, and ultimately standing up for what is right, not necessarily what what is popular, which is what I see today. There's a lot of people out there that are standing up for, you could say, a popularity contest rather than what's actually right. And inside they know what's right and what's wrong. But you know what? Sometimes economics has a bigger influence than it should. But I'm hoping that for those of you out there listening, that you take this to heart, that you can actually do something to actually move your life forward. If you see this injustice, please stand up for it. Thank you very much. Tune in next week, Thursday, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of Complete with Purdeep. Take care.